Hello, hello. I'm Casey,
And I'm Fallon.
and this is our first official case for our podcast,
Render
Render
the
the
Darkness.
Darkness. I just want to start off by saying that Fallon and I are sisters, and we very much enjoy listening to true crime podcasts ourselves. And one of our favorites, and I hope it's okay to shout them out here, is Morbid. So if anybody hasn't ever listened to Morbid, you should definitely go check them out. They're fantastic.
Amazing.
But I mentioned that to say that I kind of think we took one out of their playbook when we were trying to orchestrate this whole thing, and we really liked the idea or the concept of not knowing what case the other person was going to be doing. So we've kind of taken that approach with this. So I will be doing the first case, which Fallon does not know what it is or anything about it, so that she has natural responses and reactions and questions to what is being said. So if you have not heard of this first case, you guys will be hearing it for the first time together.
Woo. I'm
So,
excited.
that being said, let's get started on the case. So for my first case, I chose to cover the Halls Mills murder, better known as the minister and the choir singer. The victims in this case are Reverend Edward Wheeler Hall, as well as Eleanor R. Mills. Just to give you a little bit of Eleanor's background, she was born in Brunswick, New Jersey in November of 1988. She was married to James E. Mills, who was a full-time janitor at the Lord Sterling Elementary School and was also an acting sexton in the St. John the Evangelist Episcopal Church. They shared two children together, Charlotte E. Mills, born 1906, and Daniel Mills, born 1910. And a little bit of Reverend Hall's background. Edward Wheeler Hall was raised in Brooklyn, New York. He received his theological degree in Manhattan. After graduation, he moved from New York to Basking Ridge, New Jersey, and then to St. John the Evangelist Episcopal Church in New Brunswick, the same place that James Mills was a sexton and Eleanor was in the choir. He married Frances Noel Stevens in 1911. So, Halls and Mills were having an affair, and it seemed to be pretty quite known. It's been noted that they were fairly open about it, so there was a lot of gossip around town regarding the affair, as well as some pretty open disapproval. Not only because they were both married, but because Hall and his family were in the upper class, and Mills was considered to be part of the poor working class. So, yeah, lots of reasons for some angst on people's parts there. Okay, so their bodies were discovered together on September 16th, 1922 in, and I hope I say this right, DeRussey's Lane, which was also dubbed Lover's Lane. And they were discovered by a young couple who were just out taking a stroll. The bodies were found posed with, it assumed they were posed after their death, but they were found laying side by side on their backs with their feet facing a crabapple tree. Hall was on Mill's left side, his arm was touching hers, and her arm was touching his. Hall's hat was covering his face, and Mill's scarf was covering her neck. Hall had one gunshot only and was shot in the head. The bullet entered above his right ear and traveled downward, exiting the left rear of his neck, and he had some slight bruising, but it wasn't determined if the bruises were from any form of struggle. So, Mills, however, her body was in far much worse condition. She was said to have been shot 3 times. There was one bullet wound in the center of her forehead, about 2 inches above her nose. The second gunshot went through her cheek, and the third pierced her right temple. It was also discovered that Mills had her tongue removed, and her tongue was missing. They never found it.
Wow.
There was also one of Reverend Hall's calling cards laying at his feet. And there were some of the pair's love letters they had written to each other, ripped up and strewn in between the bodies. The autopsy showed that both of them had been shot by a .32 caliber handgun. It was pretty quickly suspected that Reverend Hall's wife, Frances, had played a part in the murders.
Yeah, see, I would think that too. That's the first thing that come to my mind was,
It was thought that she had recruited her two brothers, Henry Hugel Stevens and William Willie Carpenter Stevens. And I read on a document or two that there may have been a cousin suspected as well, but I never saw anything really verifying that part of it, and he was never tried, if that was true. Anyway, the police were very careless with this crime scene. They did not tape it off. Reporters almost immediately showed up, and
they're basically trampling like all over.
They trampled it all. Not only did reporters show up, but just onlookers in general showed up. They were passing around the evidence, the calling card, the love letters. They were taking pictures of the bodies. They were very careless with this crime scene. So the potential for fingerprint evidence wasn't really high at that point. But despite the lack of evidence, the district attorney wasted no time bringing the case in front of a jury under the theory that Miss Hall had convinced her brothers to kill the pair. However, the jury denied an indictment due to lack of evidence. But that didn't end the case. The tabloids were continuing the craze over this case all over town by continuing to report about it. We were in the 1920s, so people were still reeling from the war and the pandemic, and they needed a distraction, and the tabloids really kind of capitalized on that, and they did their best to give them a way that they could be distracted. Yeah. Especially a man by the name of William Randolph Hearst. He owned a paper called the New York Daily, and was always looking to one-up his competition, which at the time was papers like the New York Daily and the New York Graphic. His paper resurrected the case in 1925 and reported on it so heavily with so many details that were left out of the initial investigation that the New Jersey officials had to look back into the case.
Wait. So he had more information than the original investigators did?
He did. He was reporting more information than the initial investigators reported.
Oh, okay.
We'll put it that way. He reported more than they initially reported.
Okay, gotcha.
Some of the details were the fact that Willie Stevens owned a .32 caliber pistol, and his fingerprints were found on the calling card.
Oh, wow.
Another fact they reported on was that Jane Gibson, who was better known as the Pig Woman, and as far as I can tell, she was called that literally because she owned a farm and owned hogs.
Oh.
And the farm was butted up against the orchard. But I'm going to not call her that because I don't think that's a great name.
No, that's kind of rude.
Anyway.
I got a question though.
Yeah.
Okay, so you said that one dude's fingerprints were on the calling card, but weren't they passing it around though?
They were, but they still fingerprinted it. They found multiple fingerprints on the calling cards, but to find a fingerprint of somebody who also has the exact murder weapon,
okay,
gotcha. You could kind of connect two and two there at the very least and have some kind of evidence.
Yeah, I gotcha. Okay.
Because I don't think any of the other fingerprints they found on the calling cards were owners of that specific type of gun.
Yeah.
I don't know that, but anyway, Jane Gibson claimed to have witnessed the whole thing.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
So, with all of those details coming to light through the tabloids and the cops being forced to give this some more attention, it went back to trial. And this time, the grand jury did indict the original three suspects, which were Miss Hall, Willie Stevens, and Henry Stevens. The trial started on November 3rd, 1926, and it took place in Somerset, New Jersey. It lasted 33 days, and it was heavily covered in papers and tabloids, with most of them describing the trial as a giant circus. Jane Gibson, who also went by Jane Easton and sometimes Jane Upton, was the first witness to be called. At the time that she was called into court, she was so sick, she had to be wheeled into the court in her bed.
Oh, gosh.
So, she said that on the evening of September 14th, 1922, she heard her dogs barking, and they were facing the direction of the orchard. So curiously, she hopped on her mule and went to check out what they were barking at. She stated that is when she seen the three siblings in the orchard in the orchard with the victims. She then said, as she was leaving, that is when she heard the gunshots, so she rode back and saw Miss Hall standing crying over her husband's deceased body. Unfortunately, her account of the situation became quickly uncredible when Jane's own mother stood up and began shouting, "She's a liar, she's a liar, she's a liar," as well as the fact that when the initial investigation took place, Jane didn't come forward. It wasn't until the tabloids started writing about it that she spoke up and said anything about witnessing the murder.
So she just kind of like wanted to be in the limelight. Excuse me. The limelight for a second or something.
That's kind of what it was suspected, it seems like.
Okay.
But
That's not nice.
no. After her testimony, the three siblings each took the stand in their own defense. Frances Hall's defense was one of lack of motivation or means, and Henry's defense was essentially, prove it, I have nothing to hide. Willie's testimony, however, went a little differently. He was known locally as quote-unquote Nutty Willie, and it was speculated that he had a form of high-functioning autism, and that was pretty well known around the town, so it seemed that kind of allowed him to get some sympathy in the court.
Yeah.
So, in the end, they were all acquitted, with the defense basically claiming, or at the very least implying, that the couple got what they deserved.
Yeah.
That seemed to be where the case was to end. But in 1969, 47 years later, a man by the name of Julius Bolyag, a Hungarian immigrant, came forward claiming to have more information about the case. He stated that he was friends with Willie and that a day or two after the murders took place, he was approached by Willie, who claimed to have just come from talking to a man by the name of Ike, whose real name was Isidore Gutman. He was a known local mobster. Willie then told Julius that he needed his help with something and asked him to come with him. Willie took Julius to a car where Miss Hall and an unknown man were sitting. Willie asked Julius to go speak to his sister. When he did, Miss Hall got out of the car and handed him two envelopes, and Julius was instructed to take the envelopes to Ike. When he did this, Ike handed one of the envelopes to a man. To this day, he's simply known as Freddie. And when they checked the envelopes confirming what was inside was correct, which was suspected to be a total sum of $6,000. They told Julius if he knew what was good for him, he would keep his mouth shut. And so that's what Julius did for 47 years.
Wow, 47 years.
His statements were evaluated by a psychiatrist, as well as he was given 2 separate lie detector tests, one on April 8th and one on April 21st. And both the tests, as well as the psychiatric evaluation, concluded that Bolyag was telling the truth. The police looked further into the case, but at this point, due to lack of evidence and witnesses and it being 48 years later, nothing ever came out of the information, and this case remains unsolved to this day.
Oh, that sucks.
So there is an 8-part broadcast that you can find. It was released by WINS, which is a local New York City radio station, in 1969. I found it pretty interesting, so for anyone that wants to check that out, I'll attach the link to the notes in the episode. And there were some other theories about what might have happened to the couple. I couldn't find much in the way of credibility for any of the other theories, but just to go over some of them, one theory was that the Ku Klux plan, had killed off Reverend Hall and Miss Mills as a discouragement for immorality in general. Another was that local teenagers had committed the murders. And during the trial, it was even suggested that Jane Gibson herself had committed the murders. But again, I couldn't find any information that any of those theories were ever looked into or taken seriously in any way. So...
No, I don't have any proof or anything like that, but I'm still going with the original.
The wife and the brothers. It seems the most practical. And, you know, I personally have listened to all of Boyog's recordings. He sounds pretty credible. He sounds pretty convincing to me. So I think I personally would lean towards that as well.
Okay.
But yeah, it's just, you know, crazy that this case, you think listening to the details in a flow would kind of generate an obvious route, like the wife and the brothers, but...
I mean, you said that can't talk. The one brother's fingerprint was on the calling card.
Willie's, yeah. And he had the gun.
Yeah, and he had the gun, so, I mean...
And he was later identified by Boyog as the guy who approached him to go talk to the sister to take the envelopes, so...
Okay, yeah, see, I'm telling you.
But, you know, again, it's 1922, 1925, and, you know, they weren't able to diagnose things like autism and things like that at that time, so, you know, there's probably a lot of factors that play into that aren't necessarily detailed.
Yeah. That's true.
So I could see both sides of the fence on this one. That's just me personally. Yeah. But before I end this podcast or this case, I wanted to talk a little bit about Project Cold Case. It's actually where I found this case. They are a nonprofit organization dedicated to victims of unsolved homicides as well as their families through awareness and advocacy. It's a great organization. It's helping bring awareness to these cases and to the general public, and it's a great way to get these unsolved cases heard and hopefully more known about. So if that's something that anybody is interested in looking into, I will attach the link in the show notes for that as well.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, that's my first case.
I thought that was pretty good. I'm still saying it's the wife. That's my opinion. That's what I'm saying. It's the wife.
Fair enough. And we look forward to hearing your opinions about the case and about the podcast and theories. And we are open to listen and read and happy to take suggestions. If anybody has a case they would like us to cover or look into, that's hopefully going to be the direction that this podcast takes. We're really hoping that we get a lot of fan engagement and requests.
Yeah, and another thing too is the next case is going to be mine, but it's going to be another true crime. We're going to eventually get in on the paranormal. We just, thought we would start with the true crime first.
Yeah, and I tried to make it a case that, I'm sure it's well known. I was able to research it and get quite a bit on it, and there are books on it and a lot of things on it. I just wanted to cover something that I personally had never heard covered before.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that I don't want to cover the common cases, because I do.
We'll
Absolutely, I do, and I will. Eventually we will. But I just wanted to start with some of the ones that I'd never heard.
Yeah.
And like I said, hopefully if you have a case that you would like to be covered that you've never heard covered, it may be local to you or maybe not local to you, and you want to suggest it, we'll definitely be looking for those messages and comments. So feel free to reach out.
And eventually we'll have an email and all that fun stuff that you can send stuff to.
Yes, we will. We will have, I will attach an email to the show notes in the podcast as well, so that you're able to reach out via email if you would like to do that. And that's it. You have anything you want to add?
No, I think pretty much covered everything at the moment, so I think we'd be good.
All right. Well, thank you guys for your time, and till next time. Bye.
Bye.